ABC. It's Dave here, and I came on to enter Beth's contest. She goes by the name of B-Side Records, and I'll leave a link below. I found out about her contest from Jacob over at Moon Rock, who lives up around Denmark. And she has a 100 subs contest, although I think she's probably got more subs than that right now. And I just kind of discovered her channel through him. And she asked 3 questions, and they're pretty easy questions, and I like the questions that she asked, so I thought I'd enter her contest as well and support her channel. And she does various kinds of videos, you know, about music. She'll go out to garage sales and flea markets and stuff like that and show those outings, and then tell you what she picked up. And then she also just does some videos about the records of, say, 1986 and stuff like that. But like I said, I'm kind of new to her channel, but I watch her videos. I've started watching her videos. So anyway, she has 3 questions. And the first question, Queen was her favorite band. She said, show your Queen albums that you have. And actually I only have one album by them, and it's News of the World, this one here. And it's a pretty good album. I would say it's sort of very much in the style that they became known as. And you may know that the cover to this album here was painted by a science fiction artist. His name's Kelly Freas, and the drummer of the band, who I can't remember what the drummer's name is, but he had an analog magazine that had this cover on it. And they later contacted Kelly and asked him if he would do the cover for that. I have a book here by Frank Kelly Freas is his name, and it has the original cover right here. And as you can see, he substituted the robot there is just holding one guy, and he substituted the entire band for the album cover. But I believe this copy of Analog came out in 1952, so I assume that their drummer enjoyed reading science fiction. And the book that I have here, which is just called Frank Kelly Freas, The Art of Science Fiction, with the introduction by Isaac Asimov, has a lot of his artwork in it, and just various you know, topics that he talks about, and you know, his influences for art and stuff like that. I believe he passed away a couple of years ago, but yeah, he was a really good artist, so I can see why they used him for his album cover. The second thing that Beth asked is show me your soundtracks, and she asked 3 questions, so if you can just answer one of them, you can still enter her contest. Say if you just have a Queen album and you don't have any of the others, you know, she'll let you enter her contest. If you answer all 3, she'll give you 3 entries into it. But she asked about if you have any soundtracks, which I do. I'm not a huge soundtrack collector, but I do collect some of them. This is Goodbye Columbus by The Association. This is one of those films that came out in, oh golly, I'm guessing the late 60s, 69, that's what I figured. But The Association were like a vocal pop rock band back in the day, And this movie is very much like Dustin Hoffman's film, The Graduate. And it stars Ali MacGraw and Richard Benjamin. And it's just kind of about their relationship and how that relationship goes and everything. I think it's got Jack Klugman in it, which that's him, I believe, right there. Or maybe that's a different actor. But anyway, I like the album and I like the movie as well. Here's one called Country, which I have not seen. It stars Jessica Lange and Sam Shepard. But I believe I had this in my Netflix queue. I just haven't gotten around to watching it yet. And it's not so much about a Western or anything. It's just about farming, I believe, and a family trying to get their crops in. But it's on the Windham Hill label down here, which I like a lot of the musicians on that label. And it is indeed a good soundtrack, and it's got a little bit of orchestration on it too by Charles Gross. And then it's got like Mark Isham on it, George Winston, Daryl Anger, Mike Marshall, a lot of the Windham Hill artists, which are really good at conveying an evocative landscape and soundscape. But it's another good album. This one is film music by Mark Isham, who was on the other album. And it's from 3 different soundtracks. One of them is Mrs. Soulful, which had Diane Keaton in it. The other is The Times of Harvey Milk, which I believe was a documentary that was shown on PBS back in the day about the politician in San Francisco, Harvey Milk. And then the third one, Never Cry Wolf, was a good movie, and it's a good soundtrack as well. It was just about a guy going to I believe it was a way station. It's been many years since I've seen it, but he goes to a way station out in some snowy landscape like Alaska or the North or South Pole, something like that, and was doing some research up there. And I can't remember if the research was on wolves or what, but the name of the movie and the title of that song on here is Never Cry Wolf, and it's worth watching. This is Firestarter, Tangerine Dream. Of course, that's Drew Barrymore on the cover. And starred Drew Barrymore and Sam Keith. I actually didn't care for this movie when it first came out, but it came on TV not too long ago, and I rewatched it and enjoyed it a lot more. And I could actually see owning the movie if I can ever find it, you know, at a discount price or something like that. But the score is by Tangerine Dream, and you know, it's worth picking up for the movie. They kind of play some a family that has psychic abilities that were trying to be harnessed by the government, or this outfit by the government, and the government's trying to track them down, and they're trying to get away. So, but yeah, good soundtrack. This is a Philip Glass classical music soundtrack to the movie Koyaanisqatsi, Life Out of Balance. And it's basically, I think that's a Hopi word meaning life out of balance, and it's sort of an art film, and it kind of juxtaposes you know, the modern world with a natural world, and leaves it up to the viewer to kind of sort all out what the movie is about, I guess you could say. But it has some striking imagery in it, and then you got the Philip Glass score, which goes along really well with it, so worth seeking out. This is Around Midnight, and I've seen the movie, but it's been so many years since I've seen it, I can't tell you what it's about other than just a jazz musician. And it has a lot of good jazz musicians on here like Herbie Hancock, Billy Higgins, Bobby Hutcherson, Dexter Gordon, Cedar Walton, you know, it's Tony Williams, and it's just filled with good music. So if you like jazz, seek out the soundtrack, or you know, watch the movie. This is Nutcracker Suite, which was a selection. This is a selection by Tchaikovsky that happened to be on the Walt Disney Fantasia, the animated movie that they made many years ago. I think back in the 40s or 30s, something like that. But it has two different selections on it by Leopold Stokowski and the Philadelphia Orchestra. And like I said, it has just two selections. The whole movie is instrumental, but that album just has two cuts off of it. This is by Elvis Presley, King Creole. And this is Rockers, which is a Jamaican movie. I never have seen the movie, but this is a really good soundtrack if you ever run across it. And it's a compilation of different reggae performers down in Jamaica. It's got the well, just a lot of different ones. I think Inner Circle's on here, the Maytones, the Heptones, Peter Tosh, and other bands like that. And then I've got a CD of Woody Allen classics. This is music from several of his films like Love and Death, Manhattan, Another Woman, and it just has like you know, different interpretations from classical musicians like Bach. Cello Sonatas is on here. Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. There's some Mendelssohn on here, and let's see, several others. Eric Satie, and they're performed by different ensembles like the Juilliard String Ensemble or Quartet, and Yo-Yo Ma, and George Szell, just in Philharmonic, various performers. Here's one to Manhattan, which has also got a lot of the selections on it from George Gershwin, who went really well with the New York City skylight. And then the third question that she asked, she likes horror movies, scary movies, and says to show some of the stuff that you have that is horror, you know, in that genre. And if you like horror, you ought to check out this album here. This is by Rocky Erickson and the Aliens, and all the songs on it are kind of horror inspired songs, and it's a rock and roll album, but it's got stuff on it like I Think of Demons, I Walk with a Zombie, Night of the Vampire, Cold Night for Alligators, Creature with the Atom Brain, Stand for the Fire Demon. So like they're all songs that are inspired by if not old horror movies, but specifically then, you know, they're inspired by horror movies, you know, in general, the titles and the subject matter of the songs. Really neat album, and pretty rocking at the same time. See, also I've got this is artwork I did back in art class. See if I can get it all in here. This is called, I titled it American Heroes, and it's got George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and of course Freddy Krueger there on the end in the orange shirt. And I kind of got the inspiration or the idea for it from listening to a news story on NPR radio, and they asked a bunch of school kids who George Washington and Abraham Lincoln were, along with Ronald Reagan and President Ford, and I think Jimmy Carter and some other ones. And they knew who Abraham Lincoln were and George Washington and then Freddy Krueger. And then they didn't know the other ones. So it's just kind of my take on the education system, and you know, just how that whole phenomenon is a bit odd. Also have these horror models. This is Dracula here, and then I have another one on Wolfman, like this. And these came out, these are reproductions here, but they came out in the, I guess the 60s, early 60s, maybe something like that. I think by Revell. And I believe they also had one on Frankenstein, but my brother and me used to buy these things and put them together. And these are reproductions, so when they came out I bought at least these two. I'd like to have the other ones. I think they had the Mummy, and I'm not sure what else. They had Frankenstein and the Mummy also, and maybe the Creature from the Black Lagoon. But I'm a fan of all these Universal horror movies, so I bought these. I just haven't put them together yet. And speaking of movies, I also buy horror movies and that kind of thing. This is a good book on horror movies called Graven Images, and it starts with the I believe the 30s, if I'm not mistaken. Well, it says the teens and 20s, excuse me, and goes through the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. And it has a writer like Stephen King or Robert Bloch and Ray Bradbury, Harlan Ellison, Peter Straub, Clive Barker, and they introduce each decade. And it's got some real neat write-ups on the movies themselves, and really colorful posters to go with all of it. That's from the movie Freaks. So it's a real colorful book on horror, and I think there's some science fiction in here as well. But it makes for a real interesting read. This is one by Bernie Wrightson. This is one of his. It's the Frankenstein story, but he adds his artwork in it to it, which is line drawings like this. He was a cartoonist. But here's another one. But he was at the Comic-Con one year in Dallas, and I picked it up at his table. He was one of the guests there. There's an introduction by Stephen King, and then he also signed it for me. Bernie Wrightson. He passed away, golly, I think a couple of years ago now. Here's one just on Frankenstein. And they had some other books like this too. I wish I'd picked them up, but I didn't. But you know, it's all about the monster Frankenstein, and about the different. There's been all kind of Frankenstein movies, and this just kind of covers, you know, all that. I think, let's see, that's Frankenstein in Space or something like that, I believe is the name of it. What does it say on here? A Japanese movie made in 1974. And of course, I collect the movies. This is the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This was actually shot down in Central Texas, down around Austin somewhere. And here's the Wicker Man. This is the original Wicker Man. I tend to like the original movies better. This has Christopher Lee in it, and Edward Woodward, who played the oh golly, he had a series on TV now, and I can't think of the name of it. But anyway, it has an interesting soundtrack to it, sort of a folkish, a psychedelic folkish soundtrack. But it's a good movie too. And then Salem's Lot by Stephen King. This one here has a bunch of Hammer horror on it, and I like a lot of that Hammer horror, particularly the Dracula and Frankenstein ones. But yeah, I'll probably be watching some of those come Halloween. This is a ghost story that has George C. Scott in it, called The Changeling, excuse me, and it's well worth seeing if you haven't ever seen it. Here's one called The Beyond, which is a H.P. Lovecraft story by Stuart Gordon. He was the same guy that did Reanimator, that series, and then this was his, I'm not sure, the film after that one, and he's done some other ones as well. But and then they remade Reanimator several times, but from different directors. But here's another H.P. Lovecraft movie, an older one from the 60s called Dunwich Horror. This has Sandra Dee and Dean Stockwell in it. It's a pretty good movie for the date. This was one of the movies that I saw when I was a kid growing up, and it scared me to death. It was a double bill. This was the first movie on the bill, I Married a Monster from Outer Space, and it's a alien invasion picture, basically, about this lady whose husband gets captured by aliens, and he gets a electrode planted into the back of his neck, starts acting very strange, and they start doing that to everybody in their community, and everybody's starting to wonder, you know, about their loved ones and families and what have you. But yeah, it scared me to death. It was double billed with The Blob with Steve McQueen. This is a remake of The Blob. This came out in the 80s, I believe, and they did a little bit of a different take on The Blob, The Blob's origin. But if you haven't seen it, it's worth seeking out the remake. This is from Lucia Fulci, The Beyond, which is Italian horror movie, and it doesn't make a lot of sense, but I like it because it's sort of surreal, particularly the ending, and you just kind of have to piece it together in your own head as to the story and everything. But it has some interesting scenes in it, and like I said, it's kind of a little bit surrealistic, so I like it for that reason. Of course, you have Hostel. And this is the original King Kong, which is the one I prefer, actually. This was another one I saw when I was a kid that scared me to death, and I saw it on TV with my dad when I was a kid, and he said that when he was a kid, it was one of the big movies, you know, at the time that he saw at the cinema, and you know, I still like it to this day for that reason and for the nostalgia of it. But when they finally got to Skull Island in the movie, and you hear, you know, the roaring of King Kong and all the dinosaurs and whatnot, I finally had to go to bed because it was just scaring me too much. But yeah, it's a classic movie for sure. Here's a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which is on VHS, but it's got Frederick March in it. Supposedly this is the better version. I don't know. You know, kind of depends on the viewer on that one. Here's the Alfred Hitchcock Psycho. Of course, it's a classic. And I've just got other things like books. Here's one I've shown before, but it's a Stephen King companion, real big, thick book, and it's got, you know, occasional illustrations in it and whatnot. It just talks about Stephen King and, you know, his whole career. Talks about him growing up and, you know, him writing, you know, his first story. Some of his first stories, you know, even in grade school and, you know, even, you know, high school and, you know, later on in life, you know, getting famous with Carrie and just his whole career really. But if you're into Stephen King, it's a real interesting, breezy kind of read, even though it's real big and thick. But I like it for that reason, because it gives you a lot to read. It's by George Bream, I guess maybe is his name. But 4 Decades of Fear from the Master of Horror. So anyway, that is my contribution to your 100 subs contest, Beth, and I hope you enjoyed watching it, and hope you get a lot more entries into your contest and a lot more subscribers to your videos on YouTube. And like I said, I'll leave a link below if you'd like to enter her contest. And hope everybody's enjoying their September going into October. I know I am. So we'll talk to you later. Bye.